comrades. It is Black Red Redemption, also known as BRG, Black Red Guard, back again with some more spicy hot takes and half-assed theoretical analysis. So, the title of this stream is How This Maoist Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love Anarchists. So, first things first, I guess I should address the topic of left unity. A lot of people seem to understand this concept as being basically everybody should get together in some type of big tent formation and be friends forever. As a Maoist, I realize that that is never going to happen. As a human being, I realize that that is never going to happen because nowhere in our history have human beings agreed 100% on everything. So the idea that there can be some overarching left unity is absurd, idealist nonsense. But what I do support and what all communists, anarchists, what have you should support is tactical unity. Let's just take a look at our landscape, okay? I'm an American. This applies for comrades overseas as well, according to their own material and political conditions. But let's just look at our landscape here in the United States. The NAACP has declared Florida a no-travel zone for black people. Florida has declared itself a no-existence zone for trans people. And Florida is sort of the vanguard of this wave of reaction, and the governor of the Sunshine State, Ron DeSantis, has a pretty good shot at winning the White House in 2024, next year. So, we have to realize that sectarianism, by sectarianism I mean promoting the interests of one's own tiny leftist tendency or tiny organization that fancies itself a vanguard to the detriment of the workers' movement. Sectarianism is bad. It strengthens our enemies. It harms us. It harms the masses that we claim to want to make revolution on behalf of. And when the masses see us spending most of our time squabbling amongst each other, as opposed to putting together programs to help them and alleviate the problems that they're going through, they're going to lose confidence in the left. They're going to embrace all types of reactionary bad things. They're going to embrace fascism. They're going to embrace cultural pork chop nationalism. They're going to embrace liberalism and a variety of other horrible things that are ultimately not in their best interests. So, my own theoretical development, I would say I started out as a sort of vague liberal. Then I developed into a revolutionary black nationalist, which I still am. I was a Trotskyite for like a month until I met actual organized Trotskyites and found them insufferable. No insult to Trotskyists who actually do work. But and then I began to study because I'm pretty good at detecting hypocrisy and bullshit, and I saw the online so-called Marxist-Leninists basically saying that Stalin did nothing wrong. And I was like, okay, if Stalin did nothing wrong, then why did the Soviet Union collapse? Like, what was the root cause of this? So I started studying Maoist literature. And Maoism explained why the Soviet Union was unable to accomplish the task that it set for itself at its inception, the liberation of the entire world's proletariat. And I read Mao's critiques of Stalin, and basically, Stalin did not accurately handle contradictions among the people. He had too many people shot, and there was no room for what we Maoists call line struggle or debate or criticism within the party of the top leaders. And then you had a privileged strata of people, the nomenclatura, who basically rode above the heads of the masses and set up a new exploitative regime. So Maoism, I'm a Maoist because it answered all of the questions I had about the contradictions within the USSR. Um, and when we talk about anarchists and anarchism, we who are communists have to realize that they are essentially fighting for the same thing that we're fighting for. They want a classless, stateless, moneyless society. The hang-up doesn't seem to be, it is the question of whether a transitional state and dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary. Of course, as a Marxist-Leninist Maoist, I recognize the need for a transitional state, especially in a crumbling and soon-to-be deceased American empire. So when we talk about anarchists and other groups who are fighting for the same things that we're fighting for, the liberation of oppressed nationalities and the proletariat, the global proletariat, not just our own proletariat because we're not social chauvinists, we have to realize that we cannot engage in the constant internet back and forth. Oh, you're a tanky, or you're an anarchoid, or like this stuff is ridiculous. Okay, like there are people that are literally preparing and organizing and actively killing us. A black man was strangled to death in full view of the general public not even 3 weeks ago in the subway in New York City, a bastion of liberalism in the Democratic Party. So time out for playing and bullshit. We need to develop and support our allies and our comrades. Now, do anarchists have very severe theoretical and practical problems? Sometimes, yes. And all left tendencies within the United States are dominated by settlers, by white people, because white people are the majority of this country. And when I study, okay, when I investigate a tendency, I search out the views of people like me, black people, new Africans, who have organized and worked within that tendency. So here I have two pieces that were written by black anarchists. One is published on the old website of the Industrial Workers of the World. I'm also a member of the IWW. And it addresses the contradictions and issues and problems that many white-led so-called authoritarian leftist sects and groups have engaged in, to the detriment of the struggle for liberation of our people. So the first one was published in Black Autonomy in April of 1996, almost 30 years ago. Wow. By a comrade named Greg Jackson. So let's see what Brother Jackson has to say. So this is essentially an open letter to the various European American leftist, Marxist-Leninist, and Marxist-Leninist Maoist, in particular. By Marxist-Leninist Maoist, I assume that Brother Jackson is referring to the RCP, the Revolutionary Communist Party, which ceased to be Maoist in the 80s, groups within the United States. I have many issues with many groups, some general, some very specific. The way in which this is presented may seem scattered at first, but I encourage all of you to read and consider carefully what I've written in its entirety before you pass any judgments. So, Jackson quotes Lenin. I love when anarchists actually engage with with our political thinkers and our ideology, as opposed to engaging with a straw man caricature that they've made. So Brother Jackson already gets some points in my book. And uh, he says that Lenin said that we should take from each national culture only its democratic and socialist elements. We take them only and absolutely in opposition to the bourgeois culture and bourgeois nationalism of each nation. It can be argued that Lenin's statement in the current American context is in fact a racialist position. Who is he or the Bolsheviks themselves to take anyone or pass judgment on anyone, particularly since the privileges of having white skin are a predominant factor within the context of American style oppression? Limited privilege in capitalist society is a prime factor in the creation and maintenance of bourgeois ideology in the minds of many whites of various classes in the U.S. and elsewhere on the globe. So he already has a developed analysis of the system of white supremacy. White privilege is a capitalist thing. It was developed to weld the various settler strata, castes, and classes into an oppressor nation with allegiance to the bourgeoisie of this oppressor nation. When have legitimate struggles or movements for national and class liberation had to ask permission from some Eurocentric intellectual authority who may have seen starvation and brutality but has never experienced it himself? Where there is repression, there is resistance, period. Self-defense is a basic human right that we as black people have exercised time and time again, both violent and non-violent, a dialectical and historical reality that has kept many of us alive up to this point. So he's already more advanced than many so-called MLs and social democrats who think that black people need to be taught either violence or nonviolence. We are a very practical people, okay? If it is correct for us to use self-defense or even offensive violence, then that's what we're going to do. If it's going to get us massacred, then we're not going to do it. But what I've noticed about a lot of white leftists is that they infantilize us, okay? They view us as children that need to have our heads filled with their particular ideas. And thinking like this is why the left doesn't really have any pull, any staying power within new African communities, despite them showing up to all of our riots with their flyers and their ugly yellow and black signs. Yes, there was a dig at PSL. Assuming that this was not Lenin's intent, and assuming that you all truly uphold worldwide socialism and communism, the question must be asked, why is it that each and every white-dominated, white-led vanguard in the United States has in fact done the exact opposite of what Lenin proclaims and recommends when it comes to interacting with blacks and other people of color? Have any of you actually sat down and seriously thought about why there are so few of us in your organizations? And at the same time, why non-white socialist and communist formations, particularly in the black community, are so small and isolated? I have a few ideas. 1. A fundamentally incorrect analysis of the role of the white left in the last 30 years of civil rights to black liberation struggle. By most accounts, groups such as the Black Panther Party, from which many people who would end up becoming anarchists came, by the way, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, American Indian Movement, and the Puerto Rican Independence Movement set the standard for not only communities of color, but also for revolutionary elements in the white community. All of the above groups were ruthlessly crushed, their members imprisoned or killed. Very few white left groups at the time fought back against the onslaught of COINTELPRO by supporting these groups, with the exception of the smaller, armed underground cells. In fact, many groups, such as the Progressive Labor Party and the Revolutionary Union, now known as the RCP-USA, these are the Maoists he referred to at the beginning of this letter, saw the repression of groups they admired and at the same time despised as an opportunity to assert their own version of vanguard leadership on our population. Another comrade, whose name I cannot recall at this time, said basically the same thing. I think it was Lorenzo Combois Irvin. But this is historically demonstrated truth. The white left realized that it was colonized people, black people, indigenous people, Puerto Ricans, Chicanos, etc., who made these movements move. They also realized that they had no pull and no standing within their own white middle class or even working class communities. So they were essentially parasites. And we see the same parasitism today whenever a black person gets killed. White left groups, white led left groups, and their black tokens always show up to black communities to get in the front page of papers and see what they can control and dominate and see who they can recruit into their into what are basically little cults. Um, I despise A.B. Hoffman. Don't ever mention his name to me again. I hate that man. Um, so let's see. What they failed to recognize, and what many of you generally still fail to recognize, is that vanguard leadership is developed. It does not just magically happen through preachy, dogmatic assertions, nor does it fall from the sky. Instead of working with the smaller autonomous formations to help facilitate the growth of black and white self organization, the vanguard leadership of the black masses themselves and all others, nurtured through grassroots social and political alliances rooted in principle, that's the thing. All unity has to be developed through principle. What is principle? It basically means that we agree on this, we are working towards this, and this is how we're going to move in this coalition. People talk about the Rainbow Coalition a lot. It wasn't just an amalgamation of various groups for opportunistic reasons. It was a principled leadership. It was operating under principled leadership. I'm sorry, I cannot talk tonight. It was operating under principled leadership, meaning the Black Panther Party, and it was organized by working class youth who knew what it was to get your head cracked open by the police. And they moved and they organized around this basis. They did not just get together and be like, okay, here's our principles of unity, and then start deciding how they could fuck each other over or pick off members of others' organizations. Um, so he refers to these practices as being paternalistic and parasitic, which they are. And he also mentions how these settler left groups sought to either take them over or divide their memberships against each other until the group or groups were liquidated. Again, opportunism that serves nobody but the ruling class. The only reason any kind of principled unity existed prior to large scale repression is because black led formations had no illusions about white radicals or their politics and had no problems with kicking the living shit out of them if they started acting stupid. Notice also that the majority of white radicals who were down with real struggle and real organizations and were actually trusted and respected by our people are either still active or still in prison. Speaking of black revolutionaries beating the shit out of white radicals, Fred Hampton punched Mark Rudd in the face because his the SDS office refused to allow the Black Panther Party to use their mimeograph machine. And we're doing a bunch of other opportunistic shit. If you don't know who Mark Rudd is, he was basically one of the founding cadre of what we know as the Weather Underground organization. I think I referred to them last night as the people who were very good at blowing up toilets. But yeah, they were a bunch of well, they were mixed class, but their leadership and many of their cadre were from very well-heeled upper middle class, even bourgeois families. And they acted just like that. They spat on their own working class. A Maoist slogan is "Serve the people." The Weather Underground, they didn't even do this ironically. They referred to fighting the people or fuck the people. So they had contempt for the masses, and it was essentially like a decade-long bullshit party. They took themselves extremely seriously, and yet they didn't do anything. They ignored the Vietnamese, who were at this time waging a war of national liberation against the country that the Weather Underground came from, and they ignored them when the Vietnamese representatives that they spoke with told them to stop blowing up bathrooms and doing other stupid things, and actually work to organize the people. Organizing the people is not fun. Blowing up toilets is. So, toilet discourse over. So, Brother goes on to talk about the white left's concept of the Vanguard Party. He refers to their concept as being arrogance. It is arrogant because we've already discussed how a vanguard is not just something that you declare yourself to be. A vanguard is something that that's developed. The masses declare you the vanguard. How do you know the masses consider your organization a vanguard? Because they come to your events. They come to your protests without you constantly hounding them. They come to your study groups. When you do social investigation and class analysis, they offer you information and they offer you tips and guidance and pointers on how to move in their neighborhood. Another argument against vanguardist tendencies in individuals or amongst groups is the creation of sectarianism and organizational cultism between groups and within groups. Karl Marx himself fought tirelessly against sectarianism within the working class movement of 19th century Europe. He was also a staunch fighter against those who attempted to push his persona to an almost godlike status, declaring once in frustration, "I assure you, sir, I am no Marxist." It could also be argued from this viewpoint that the vanguardist white left in the U.S. is today, by a definition rooted in the day-to-day practice of Marx himself, anti-Marx and by proxy anti-revolutionary. This is my main issue with there's a Maoist concept. I wouldn't even call it a Maoist concept. There is a left opportunist concept of Hefetur or great leadership. It's already right there in the name. Like, anytime you hear the term great leadership or Hefetur, you need to run like hell, because the individuals that are promoting these things, these concepts, are opportunists that are trying to build a cult of personality around themselves. It's just common sense. Who is the great leader going to be? Who is going to lead the American Revolution? Me! My group, my sect. Back to the brother. Like your average small business, the various self-proclaimed vanguards compete against each other, as well against the people themselves, both white and non-white, accusing each other of provocateurism, opportunism, and or possessing the incorrect line, when in fact most, if not all, are provocateurs, opportunists, and fundamentally incorrect. I love this guy. He's got a very developed sense of humor. Asada Shakur, who you should know, basically said the same thing. She criticized roundly various white left groups, Trotskyist, Maoist, Marxist, Leninist, what have you, for essentially being so arrogant that they commanded her to go work in a factory when she was going to school. And they also tried to dictate terms to the Vietnamese. They tried to label the Vietnamese national liberation fighters whose struggle they were trafficking in as cowards because they went to the Paris Peace Accords. And Asada correctly stated that who the fuck are all these white boys who can't fight their way out of a paper bag to tell the Vietnamese how to run their show? So this thing has been around for a long time. This thing I am referring to is opportunism, opportunist practice, reactionary arrogance, and dogmatism. The nature of capitalist competition demands that such methods and tactics be utilized to the fullest in order to win in the business world. The white left has in fact adapted these methods and tactics to their own brand of organizing, actively reinventing and reinforcing this very social, political, and economic relations that you claim to be against. That's a contradiction. Like, how are you going to be against capitalism, but you move just like the average capitalist, imperialist, reactionary business owner or corporate sect. Corporations are sects. Or is this phenomenon part and parcel to your theory? In volume 4 of the collected works of V.I. Lenin, this man is read. Lenin himself states up front that socialism is state capitalism. Are you all just blindly following a dated foreign blueprint that is vastly out of context to begin with no real understanding of its workings? At the same time, it can be observed that you folks are merely products of your environment, reflective of the alienated and hostile tactics and families from which many of you emerge. If you know anything about white ruling class families, they are very hostile. Go watch Succession if you don't believe me. These are, they're very backbiting people. Anybody that'll fuck their own father over for $5 is probably not somebody that you want to be taking leadership from. American society has taught you the tenets of survival of the fittest and rugged individualism, and you swallowed those doctrines like your mother's milk. That's also part and parcel of why Marxism, Leninism, and Maoism, which require democratic centralism and firm discipline, and collectivism, and anarchism also requires collectivism. Anyways, why collectivism hasn't caught on in the United States, because American society teaches all classes and all races of people that you must do for self. If you rely on other people, you are seen as being weak. Because the white left refuses to combat and reject reactionary tendencies in your own heads and amongst themselves, yourselves, and because you, refuse to see how white culture is rooted firmly in capitalism and imperialism, refusing to reject it beyond superficial culture appropriations such as Native American dream catchers, and he refers to other cultural products that white people have stolen. You, in fact, reinvent racist and authoritarian social relations as the final product of your so-called revolutionary theory, what I call left-wing white supremacy. That's a term I'm going to be using very often in my day-to-day life. Well, in my day-to-day organizing life, anyways. This tragic dilemma is compounded by and finds some of its initial roots in your generally ahistorical and wishful analysis of black-white relations in the U.S. For a correct analysis of black-white relations in the U.S., I recommend anything by J. Sakai, and I also recommend W.E.B. Du Bois, Black Reconstruction. Matter of fact, anything by Du Bois. I also recommend False Nationalism, False Internationalism. These will give you a very thorough grounding in New African and general American history and political economy. Also, Walter Rodney. And rigid, dogmatic definitions of scientific socialism or revolutionary communism based in a Eurocentric context. Thus, we are expected to embrace these socialist values of the settler-conqueror culture rather than the traditional American values of your reactionary opponents, as if we do not possess our own socialist values rooted in our own daily and cultural realities. Wasn't the Black Panther Party socialist? What about the Underground Railroad? Our ancestors, and yes, even some of yours, were practicing mutual aid back when most European revolutionary theorists were still talking about it like it was a lofty, faraway ideal. Essentially, we've been doing this shit. And that's the thing. Like, again, white leftists continue to think that that they have something necessary to teach us, when in reality, we have been applying the principles that that they trifle with and fuck up. All right. So he criticizes this guy named Green. I don't give a shit about Green. This is interesting. Even if he could show and prove his proposed system is doomed to repeat the cannibalistic practices of Joseph Stalin or Pol Pot, I would not compare Stalin to Pol Pot. Pol Pot was not a communist. Pol Pot was a fuck. Okay, like I'm not even going to use a political term to refer to him. Pol Pot was a fuck. If you kill a third of your country's population, you are in no way a communist, and it is to the eternal detriment of the revolutionary People's Republic of China that it supported this monster for so long. I've actually seen Maoists or so-called Maoists on Twitter trying to defend this individual. Like, why? Again, this is why we have to root ourselves in the masses. Like, how are you going to convince Americans who are already thoroughly brainwashed against revolutionary ideology and revolutionary practice in revolutionary states? Like, how are you going to win over the average American worker by full-throatedly defending Pol Pot? Like, I constantly tell people who are communists that you do not have to defend every shitpot dictator who claimed affiliation with our ideology, okay? Like, we are not obliged morally, ethically, or politically to defend a guy whose cadres took babies and smashed their heads against trees to save bullets. I'm sorry. But again, that's what happens when you're divorced from the masses. You have time and mental energy to defend mass murderers who call themselves communists. So let's find other juicy bits to take. So he just goes into more hardcore critique and analysis. Huh, this is interesting. What is the qualitative difference between a party bureaucrat who uses his position to steal from the people in addition to living a neo-bourgeois lifestyle, privilege derived from one's official position and justified by other party members who do the same? I really like the anarchist critique of the habit of every communist party that has come to power developing a privileged class of party members who, in essence, live off the people. This has happened in Vietnam. This has happened in China. This has happened in the USSR. This has happened everywhere. So I really, really like this, and I think a a really good example for all revolutionaries, anarchists, communists, etc., to look into is what Julius Nyerere did in Tanzania during his leadership of that country, and during uh, shit, and the system that was worked out by Thomas Sankara in Burkina Faso. Essentially, these two comrades, these two leaders, they limited the salaries of government officials. Instead of buying Benzes, Nyerere actually developed the term Wabenzi, those who drive Benzes, who these people were basically state administrators who glommed themselves onto the organs of the working class and screwed people over. They wanted to buy Benzes and shit for themselves while the people were still struggling and suffering and hungry. And I'm a really firm advocate that anybody in a leadership position, even under capitalism, like if were I an alderman or something like that, like I would donate most of my salary. I would not vote to increase my own pay at the expense of the people that elected me, because that's taking advantage of the people's trust. That's hypocrisy, especially if you get elected or come to power on a progressive platform. So Sankara mandated that Burkinabe officials wear locally made cloth. There was no importation of Armani suits from Italy or Dior from Paris. Like, you wear what the people wear. You drive what the people drive. If the people are wearing sackcloth and using donkeys, then put on the sackcloth and jump on the ass. Like, the leaders that the people put their trust in have to suffer with the people. This is a Maoist principle. It's not lifestyleism. If you don't know what the people are going through, then how are you qualified to make policies on their behalf? You're not. So he goes on to talk about history and direct community control. And about direct community control, he says that this demand has become more central over the last 30 years as we have seen the creation of a black elite of liberal and conservative Negroes puppets for the white power structure to speak through to the people, the few who were allowed to succeed because they took up the ideology of the oppressor. But they too have become increasingly powerless as the shift to the right in various branches of the state and federal government has quickly and easily checked what little political power they had. Also, we do not have direct control over neighborhood institutions as capitalists, let alone as workers. At least white workers have a means of production they could potentially seize. This is really important. I've heard this argument made by black communists. Like, we don't have a national bourgeoisie. Black people own very little real capital in this country. What we view as being the black bourgeoisie are not a real bourgeoisie. They're managers and upper level administrators in settler owned firms. Like, a black executive at, say, Walmart, he may own stock in Walmart, so technically he's part of the ownership class, but like he does not control the commanding heights of the economy. He doesn't really own shit. White people still own stuff. Small mom and pop restaurants and stores are federally funded health clinics and social services in the hood hardly count as black capitalist enterprises, nor are any of these things particularly liberating in and of themselves. But white radicals, the white left of the U.S. in particular, have a hard time dealing with the reality that black people have always managed to survive despite the worst or best intentions of the majority population. We will continue to survive without you and can make our revolution without you or even against you if necessary. Don't tell us about protracted struggle. The daily lives of non-white workers are testimony to the true meaning of protracted struggle both in the U.S. and globally. Your inability or unwillingness to accept the fact that our struggle is parallel to yours, but at the same time very specific, and will be finished successfully when we as a people, as working class blacks on the North American continent, decide that we have achieved full freedom as defined by our history, our culture, our needs, our desires, our personal experiences, and our political ideas, is by far the primary reason why the white left is so weak in this country. I like this dude. Like, he really hits the nail on the head. He does not engage in leftist respectability politics. He doesn't care what settlers think about what he's saying. He tells them the raw truth. The Black Liberation Army actually wrote a piece that's quite similar to this. It's called An Open Letter to the White Left. And there is I think it's called the Rookery Press. They put out a collected works of pieces that were written by Black Liberation Army cadre. I encourage everybody to pick it up. But yeah, they wrote something very similar. This is a critique that we have seen is shared by black people, by black revolutionaries across the political spectrum. You have an anarchist basically saying the same thing that that black communists were saying. So generally, we're right. Like, you should take us seriously if people from a variety of different contexts and political backgrounds are saying the same thing. I love Kawasi Balagoon. I am looking at his soldier story right now. It's on my bookshelf. Might give it a reread. In addition, this sinking garbage scow of American leftism is dragging other liberating political vessels down with it, particularly the smaller anti-authoritarian factions within the white settler nation itself, and the few non-dogmatic and non-ritualistic individuals within today's Marxist-Leninist parties who sincerely wish to get away from the old, tired historical revisionism of their particular revolutionary, air quote, party. So, yeah, again, reading them for filth. He is basically saying that white leftists, through their own... What the fuck was that noise? Oh. Again, I'm very new to Twitch. I'll get used to it. Through their own ignorance, are shooting themselves in the foot. They're shooting themselves in the foot. They're shooting the revolution in the foot because they, through their arrogance and through their dogmatism, or even just through their own plain stupidity and pigheadedness, are unwilling to look the truth in the face and take leadership from people who have been doing this shit for years. He talks about the Million Man March. In the end, the majority of the white leftist critics wound up tailing the most backwards elements of the Republican Party, some going so far as to echo the very same words of Senate Majority Leader Bob Dole, who commented on the day after the march that you can't separate the message from the messenger. Others parroted the words of House Majority Leader Newt Gingrich, who had the nerve to ask, did our leadership go wrong? Then he reads them for filth again. Since when were we expected to follow the leadership of white America, the right, left, or center, without some type of brutal coercion? Where is the advantage for us in following any of them anywhere? And that's the thing that many people many white leftists fail to realize. Like, what do we get by following y'all? Like, killed? Like, I'm of the impression that a lot of white people simply see black people as cannon fodder for their various schemes and scams and hustles and poor excuses for movements. And I keep referring to this because I've seen this happen so many times. Like every time a black person gets murdered by the police or by a vigilante, white leftists who never really gave a shit about us, never really thought about us outside of Twitter likes and shares, or as objects to be filled with revolutionary ideology or some grim caricature of revolutionary ideology, they all pour into our neighborhoods. They all want to get their pictures taken with the family of the victim. They all want to say, "Oh, I was here. I met such and such. I know so and so." Like going back to the example that or the comparison that the brother made, y'all see us as a business. Y'all see us as something to be used and exploited. Even in the revolutionary communist movement, you see us as capitalists, see us as labor, as commodities, as things to be used. So, yeah, what do you want from us this time? Going back to the Million Man March example, few, if any, of the major pro revolution left wing newspapers in the US gave an accurate account of the march. Many of them claim that only the black petty bourgeoisie were in attendance. I know for a fact that this is bullshit. I have old and new African co-workers who've talked about the march. Keep in mind, this march happened in 1995. I was 1 year old, yet they still talk about the march positively. Um, it was a positive display of new African, of black unity, and people still remember it. People actually are starting to want to do another one. They want to recreate the Million Man March. So this is something that's a part of our national consciousness as black people. This is something that's part of our national culture. And all leftists can see that here are a bunch of black people getting together for some purpose, and we weren't invited. And since we weren't invited, since we weren't allowed to dictate it, like we were the March on Washington in 1963, we're going to demean it or say that it's a petty bourgeoisie thing or say that it's a cultural nationalist reactionary thing. Every time black people get together and do things as black people, it's seen as being akin to being part of the Ku Klux Klan. And again, that's part of why leftists, organized leftists that are settlers, have difficulty working with us. They shouldn't be working in our communities in the first place. Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael, said that. He referred to white activists of his generation as being the Pepsi generation. They wanted to come alive in black communities because they couldn't organize their own. And when you read New African Revolutionaries' positions on the place of white people in the struggle for national liberation and socialism, they have almost unequivocally, universally said that white people have to organize white people. Like, white people cannot organize black people. That's why SNCC kicked out all of their settler cadre. It wasn't to be mean. It wasn't a separatist thing. It was because psychologically you demean and you demoralize black organizers because white people have more access to resources, more access to funding. The police are least likely to conk you over the fucking head. And black people, unfortunately, have been conditioned to believe that that we are inferior to white people, even in the left. And our working class has this notion as well. So it's not like we're trying to drive y'all away. We're saying drive yourselves to your own people, organize your own people. We got us. We have to rebuild the sense of self and the self-image as black people that y'all destroyed through slavery and Jim Crow. by treating us as objects and then as not even second class citizens, as subjects, as colonial subjects who had no rights that the white man was bound to respect, in the words of one of our Supreme Court justices. So, back to the brother. The Million Man March local organizing committees, LOCs, gave the various black left factions a forum to present ideas and concepts to entire segments of our population who were not familiar with Marxism, anarchism, Kwame Nkrumah, George Jackson, the 10-point program, class struggle, etc. It also afforded us the opportunity to begin engaging some of the members of the local Nation of Islam chapter in class-based ideological struggle, along with participating community people. Of course, it was impossible for the white left to know any of this, more proof of their profound isolation and alienation. At the time, despite our own minor ideological differences, we agreed on one point. It was none of your business or the business of the rest of the white population. We organize amongst our own. We consider it a family matter. When we have conflicts, this is also a family matter. And again, it is none of your business unless we tell you differently. How would you like it if we butted in on a heated family argument you were having with a loved one and started telling you what to think and what to do? Again, this is how you do political education in the black community. Like, white people cannot come into our communities and teach us shit, okay? Like, imagine the farce of a white leftist, a Trotskyist, an anarchist, um, Maoist, a Marxist, Leninist, revisionist, what have you, trying to teach a member of the Nation of Islam, a group that literally considers white people to be spawn of a mad scientist, about anything. Like, it's not going to work. Like, he's up here, you're down here. He considers you a beast, a created individual. So only black people can really politically educate our people, because for one, our people are more apt to take us seriously, because when a white person tries to teach a black person something, it's generally perceived as being a con, because usually it is a con. You're trying to brainwash us, or you're trying to get something out of us. You're trying to use us, because that's essentially what white people have been doing to black people for centuries. We have never really been on an equal basis of mutual respect with y'all. One uses the other. Usually it's white people using us. So if black people are going to remember George Jackson, Fred Hampton, the 10-point program, Kwame Nkrumah, etc., they have to hear it coming from our mouths. This brings me to two issues that have bothered me since January of '96. Both comments were made to me by a member of Radical Women at the International Socialist Organization. If I recall correctly, they collapsed a few years ago. Conference at the University of Washington. The first statement was, "I don't recognize black people as a nation like I do native people." My first thought was, who the fuck are you to pass judgment upon a general self-definition that is rooted in our collective suffering throughout the history of this country? She might as well join up with the right-wing Holocaust revisionists, because this is precisely what she is practicing: the denial of the Black Holocaust from 1555 to the present, along a parallel denial by proxy of the genocide against other non-white nations within the U.S. Our nationalism emerged as a defense against your white racism. The defense between revolutionary black nationalists, the difference, like Huey P. Newton, and the Black Panther Party, and cultural nationalists like Farrakhan or the Nation of Islam, is that we see our nationalism as a specific tool to defend ourselves from groups and individuals like this ignorant person, not as an exclusive or single means for liberation. We recognize that we will have to attack bourgeois elements amongst our people just as vigorously as we fight against white supremacists, left, right, or center. The difference is that our bourgeoisie, what I refer to as the Negroisie, is only powerful within our community. They have no power against the white power structure without us, nor do they have power generally without the blessing of the white power structure itself. Our task, therefore, is to unite them with us against the common enemy, while at the same time explicitly undermining and eventually eliminating our inherently reactionary influence. So this is something that's going to be a bit iffy for communists. He's basically saying that we are united more by our blackness as opposed to class, and he suggests an alliance, a cross-class alliance within our community against the common enemy, which is white capital. It's pretty odd for an anarchist to be saying, but hey, he's not wrong. Like the black petty bourgeoisie and the few black bourgeoisie, like they suffer as well. Not on an economic level because they're rich, but the child of Jay-Z, the child of Bob Marley, is still liable to be killed by a white vigilante or by a white cop. That's why he's saying that there's a basis for unity there against police brutality, against vigilante violence on the part of settlers. Like a Klansman or a cop is not going to ask you how much money you have in the bank or do you own any capital before he beats the shit out of you, okay? If he sees you driving a Lambo or a Maserati or a Rolls Royce, he's going to assume you're a drug dealer. And he's probably also going to be jealous of the fact that you make more in 5 hours than he's made in his whole miserable, pathetic life. So he's going to trash your car and he's going to beat the fuck out of you and he's going to give you a trumped up charge. Let's check the chat. Not much. The second stupidity to pass her lips concerned our support of black-owned businesses. I pointed out to her that if she had in fact studied her Marxism-Leninism, she would see that their existence goes hand in hand with Marxist theory that revolution could only ensue once capitalism was fully developed. She came back with the criticism, well, you'll be waiting a long time for that to happen. Once again, had she actually studied Marxism-Leninism, she would know that Lenin and the Bolsheviks also had to deal with the same question. Russia's economy was predominantly agricultural, and its bourgeois class was small. They decided to go with the mood and sentiments of the peasantry and industrial workers at that particular moment in history, seize the means of production and distribution anyway. Who says that we wouldn't do the same? The participants in the LA Rebellion and others, despite their lack of training in radical left-wing political theory, besides being predominantly black, Latino, or poor, white people in America got it half right. They seized the means of distribution, distributed the products of their collective labor. We also saw this in Minneapolis, by the way. It will forever gladden my cold heart that Target was seized, and they were handing out shit. It was basically a giant swap meet, a giant flea market. And, I mean, that just gladdens my heart. Like, the people are able to organically come together without any, like, push from a certain leftist sect and do things in their own interests. Like, they don't need Trotskyists or Maoists or anybody to come and tell them what to do. They already know what's good for them. It's our task as revolutionaries to jump in and help provide structure and guidance if they need it and help keep the people out of trouble. Black autonomists ultimately reject vanguardism because, as the white left, as well as elements of the black revolutionary movement, has demonstrated, it erodes and eventually destroys the fragile ties that hold together the necessary principled partnerships between groups and individuals that are needed to accomplish the numerous tasks associated with fighting back successfully and building a strong, diverse, and viable revolutionary movement. The majority of the white left is largely disliked, disrespected, and not trusted by our people because they fail miserably on this point. How can you claim to be a socialist when you are in fact antisocial? How do you all distinguish yourselves from the majority of your people in concrete, practical, and principled terms? I'm going to repeat this. How do you all distinguish yourselves from the majority of your people in concrete, practical, and principled terms? Like, we already know the bourgeoisie are exploitative. We already know that they use the workers. We already know that they don't give a fuck about us, but how exactly is the white left any different? Like, how are you fundamentally different from somebody that profits off the labor of black workers in Nigeria or in Mississippi when you profit off the death of black people to try to grow your organizations or boost your fundraisers when you inevitably get people arrested with your stupidity? Food for thought. Zero support of non white left factions by the white left. I've always found this particularly disturbing. You want our help. You all want our help, but do not want to help us. You want to march shoulder to shoulder with us against the government and its supporters, but do not want us to have a solid political or material foundation of our own to not only win the fight against the white supremacist state, but to also rebuild our communities on our own behalf and our own likenesses. So essentially, you want to use us. Like you want us to show up to your rallies so that you can say we mobilized the black masses. You want us to join your organizations where we will be abused, raped, psychologically and emotionally tortured, and generally fucked over and treated like shit until it's time to wheel us out for an interview. But you don't want to organize your own people because your own people think you're a joke. You don't want to promote or support or help develop organic instruments of black self-determination. But whenever you do an info shop or a movement incubator or anything like that, you want us to support it. Like, solidarity goes both ways. Why are we talking about Caleb Maupin? I don't give a shit about Caleb Maupin. Isn't that the guy that got spanked? He had a cadre within his organization, um, basically function as his own private sex worker and spank his ass with a paddle. Like that right there. Like, man, and he's back on Twitter talking shit. Like, I don't know, man. He's shameless. He's got balls. I'll give him that. Like, ain't no way in the world I'd have my kinks revealed to the world and then come back and start talking politics as if nothing happened, man. But what are you gonna do? Spanky. All right. So, let white Marxists provide unconditional, no strings attached, material support for non-white factions whose ideology runs parallel to theirs, and let white anarchist factions provide unconditional, again, no strings attached, material support for factions and communities of color who have parallel ideologies and goals. Obviously, the one string that can never be avoided is that of harsh economic reality. If you don't have the funds, you can't do it. That's why I was really critical of Ghazi's bullshit and Uhuru's bullshit. Like, it's a contradiction. Like, how are you going to organize for black self-determination when you're financially dependent on white people? Like, donations that are given in solidarity by people who can afford it are radically different than you hounding white people for money or hounding anybody for money every fucking week to assuage their white guilt. The Catholic Church used to do something called selling indulgences. Like, if you donated such and such to put a stained glass window in Saint whatever the fuck's church, then you got to spend less time in purgatory, which, from my very limited understanding of Catholic theology, is where you go when you might have kicked the puppy once, but you also were somewhat decent in your life. It's basically limbo. Like, you weren't totally evil, but you weren't totally good either. I've always viewed that wing of the reparations movement, first of all, reparations are they're taken. They're not begged out of the pockets of a white dude that really wants to help but works a checkout counter at a grocery store. Like that, I would just feel dirty doing that. But I don't know. Some people have no shame. So yeah, you can't squeeze blood from a stone. That's fair and logical. But if you're paying these exorbitant amounts for projects and events that amount to little more than ideological masturbation and organizational cultism, while we do practical work out of pocket or on a tiny budget amongst our own, it seems to me that a healthy dose of criticism, self criticism, and reassessment of priorities is in order on the part of you professional revolutionaries of the white left. Like, there are leftists that have decent jobs. There are leftists that are lawyers, doctors, what have you. They make low six figures, maybe mid six figures. Yeah, if you can afford it, definitely underwrite some shit. But if you're working class, like, don't, if you can chip in $20 a month for something, that's fine. Like, you should not feel guilty for not being able to give more. And an organization that is constantly hounding you for money, that's probably not a very principled organization. That's probably a grift. Oh, thank you, C Cubed, our resident Christian. If the white left vanguards are unwilling to materially support practical work by non white revolutionary factions, then you have no business showing your faces in our neighborhoods. If you Marxist missionaries insist on coming into our neighborhoods preaching the gospel of Marx, Lenin, Mao, etc., the least you could do is pay us for our trouble. You certainly haven't offered us much else that's useful. This guy reminds me a lot of myself. Like, this is how I aspire to write. To their credit, the white anarchists and anti-authoritarian leftists have been generally supportive of the black struggle by comparison, black autonomy and related projects in particular. Matter of fact, back in October of '94, in an act of mutual aid and solidarity, the Philadelphia branch of the Industrial Workers of the World, IWW, again, I am a very proud member of the IWW, printed the very first issue of Black Autonomy, 1,000 copies for free. One of their members actually got a little upset when I asked them how much we owed them for the print job. In return, and in line with our class interests, we aligned ourselves with the Philly branch and others in a struggle within the IWW against the more conservative armchair revolutionary / historical society elements within its national administrative body. Former political prisoner, a SNCC member, Black Panther, and Black autonomist, anarchist Lorenzo Combois Irvin credits the hard work of anarchist groups and in Europe and non-vanguardist Marxist and anarchist factions in the U.S. for assisting him in a successful campaign for early release from prison after 13 years of incarceration. So again, this is why I learned to stop worrying and love anarchists. Because, like, I've been a Maoist for quite a while. I've never seen Maoists print thousands of copies, well, 1,000 copies, not even 100 or even 10 copies of a black revolutionary magazine, a black revolutionary text for free. And I've never seen other Maoists actually helping people without strings. Like, when Maoists help people, we usually want something out of it, especially the white ones. Like, it's a very disgustingly transactional relationship. We help you, so you come here and you pose for a picture with us. The Gonzaloites, the left opportunists, were really good at this. Like, and then they would just start meddling in other groups, trying to change their politics, trying to turn them into a front group. The left opportunists were also really, really, really keen on infiltrating other groups in an opportunist faction. Yeah, it sucked. And just looking at the infrastructure that we use whenever uprisings or massive major protests happen, it's usually anarchists that set up the bail fund, that set up the jail support, that are the medics. Like, anarchists carry more than their share of the revolutionary progressive movement in this country. Social Democrats also surprisingly carry quite a bit. Like their money has underwritten a lot of shit. DSA money uh, is probably essential to a lot of these smaller strikes and labor actions. So that kind of influenced my journey away from sectarianism because when you're on the ground, like when you're working with people, when you're trying to make shit better and improve people's lives, it doesn't matter where your support comes from. If you're sitting in jail, it doesn't matter if it's a social democrat, if it's a DSA member, or if it's an anarchist or a Maoist that comes to bail you out. What matters is that you're out. When you need shit printed, it doesn't matter if it's an anarchist print shop. What matters is that they helped you. So that's what I mean by tactical, principled unity. We don't have to agree on everything. As a matter of fact, being human beings, we're never going to agree on everything. But if we're serious about liberating ourselves, about liberating our people, then we have to learn how to get along together on the ground. And the sectarian types, the people that spend nearly 100% of their time arguing and fighting with people on the internet, those people are not organizers. Because if they were organizers, if they actually gave a fuck about what was going on with people, if they did social investigation and class analysis, if they walked the picket line, if they actually talked to a normal ass person for more than 2 seconds for the McDonald's order, then they realize that that shit doesn't matter. That has no credence or weight in the real world. And that's why all of these terminally online people, y'all may think I'm terminally online, but there are literally people who spend every waking moment on Twitter, every waking moment in Discord chat rooms. And it sets up, the brother already talked about individualism. It sets up a sort of funky individualist conception of left politics. I am right. You are wrong. If you disagree with me, you are a revisionist. You are a reactionary. You are bound for the wall. Like we do not have. If we had a wall, why hasn't George Zimmerman visited? Why haven't all of these horrible people who have done horrible things been punished? So I think a lot of it is inspired and motivated by the impotence, the weakness of the left in this country. Because when you're doing shit, when you have power, you don't have to talk about what you're going to do. You go do it. You go do it. And that's why Maoists are really, really keen, real Maoists. Now, I'm not talking about the internet assholes that jump down your throat if you don't praise Chairman Gonzalo enough. I'm talking about real Maoists who are actually doing real Maoist shit. We constantly encourage our compatriots, our comrades, and people who talk to us, who engage with us, to get the fuck off the internet sometimes. Go outside. Go talk to people. Nearly every problem that you face as a budding communist and a budding organizer could be attributed to the fact that you are divorced from the masses. You haven't considered how you appear to ordinary, everyday people. And by disrespecting our anarchist comrades who have set up a lot of the infrastructure that we come to depend and rely on when shit happens, when shit pops off, or when we get in trouble, it shows a severe lack of maturity and a severe lack of seriousness on our part. So let's wrap this up. I'll do the other piece, the progressive plantation, tomorrow. So, bourgeois pseudo-analysis of race and class. Some of the more backward sections of the white left still push this old tired line: gay, straight, black, white, same struggle, same fight. I've heard some variant of this. I think I've been seeing a cartoon going around on Twitter. It was either produced by the Socialist Workers' Party or the Socialist Labor Party, and it was basically an attack on nationalism, on revolutionary nationalism. It showed a black worker and a white worker about to punch each other, and a capitalist was sitting above them laughing, and then they both got a pry bar and they knocked over the capitalist who was seated on this throne type thing. And I'm like, it was probably the white worker who started the fight with the black worker in the first place. So while it's true that we have the same enemy, it's not necessarily the same fight. Like, we all suffer for different reasons, and trying to mash us into, like, first of all, Maoists are really good at this. Like, how are you going to oppose left unity, yet you're also going to subsume all of these contradictions into same struggle, same fight? Like, I'm not a fan of intersectionality. The term itself, it's a postmodern term, but oppressions intersect. I'm a gay black man. What is the main source of a gay working class black man? Like, what is the main source of my oppression? Like, why do I suffer in society? It's because I'm black. Okay? Like Malcolm X said, that you don't catch hell because you're a Mason or an Elk, or because you're a Baptist or a Methodist, or because you're a Democrat or a Republican or a communist. You catch hell because you're black. Like, I've been called racial slurs before because I'm black. I'm more likely to keel over and die at 65 than a white guy my age because I'm black. So that's not the same fight. Nothing can be further from the truth. Sure, we all face with the same main enemy, the racist authoritarian state and its supporters, but unlike white males, straight or gay, and with some minor parallels to the experiences of white women, our oppression begins at birth. This is a commonality that we share with Native people, Hispanics, Pacific Islanders, and Asians. As we grow up, we go from being cute in the eyes of the larger society to being considered dangerous by the time we're teenagers. As this point is driven home to us day in and day out in various social settings and circumstances, some of us decide in frustration to give the white folks what they want to believe. We become predatory. This dynamic is played out in ghettos, barrios, Chinatowns, and reservations across the country. Even those of us who choose not to engage in criminal activity or aren't forced into it have to live under this stigma. In addition, we as individuals are still viewed as objects, and our community as a monolith. We then enter the workforce. That is, if there are any jobs available, it is there that we learn that our people and other non-whites are last hired, first fired, that our white coworkers are generally afraid of us or view us as competition, and that management is watching us even more closely than other workers, while at the same time fueling petty squabbles and competition between us and other non-white workers. Those of us who are fortunate enough to land a union job soon find out that unions are soft on racism or flat out racist in the workplace. This only makes sense as we learn later on that unions in the U.S. are running dogs of capitalism and apologists for management, despite their militant rhetoric. This, again, is why we need red unions. Let me pull something up on my phone really quick, because I saw a sister state on Twitter about financial stats that black millennials face. It says, she said 45% of black millennials make less than $20,000. 84% of black millennials make under $50,000. The average net worth of my generation, I'm a millennial, is $3,000. Home ownership rate, 29%. Average credit score for black millennial is 647. And she corrected it. It's actually, the home ownership rate is actually worse. Only 21% of black millennials own our own home. So this article was written in 1996. So shit has gotten worse. Like, we caught the full fucking brunt of the 2008 economic crisis. Most of those subprime mortgages that went It ballooned up. Yeah, most of the people that ended up getting evicted were working class black people. Well, I wouldn't say most, but many of the people that ended up getting evicted were working class black people. Most unionized workers are white. Reflective of the majority of unionized labor in the U.S., who constitute a mere 13% of the total labor force. This is why it is silly for the white left to prattle on and on about the labor movement and about how so many of our people are joining unions. That's no consolation to us when black employment hovers at 35% nationally. Okay, this was in the 90s. The economy was supposed to have been good back then. Many of these brothers and sisters living in places where permanent unemployment is the rule rather than the exception. And many more who find work at non-union dead-end service industry jobs. 1 out of 3 of our people is caught up somewhere within the U.S. criminal justice system, in jail, on prison, on parole, on work release, awaiting trial, etc., as a direct result. In addition, many white workers are supportive of racist Republican politicians, such as presidential candidate Pat Buchanan, that's a name I haven't heard in a while, I hope he's dead, who promises to protect their jobs at the expense of non-white workers and immigrants. What is the white left or union movement doing about all of that? Very good question. Let me see something. So, yeah, he basically goes into a very thorough and correct analysis of of why and how black people are fucked over, and how and why white workers don't give a shit. And that is something that the US white left tends to miss. Like, they ignore these really real, really life threatening situations and contradictions and issues, chasing a fake unity. All right, let's see what else is juicy that this brother has written. Hey, to even consider oneself white or to call oneself white is an argument for race and class oppression. Why? Because whiteness is essentially synonym for oppressor. This does not mean that it's bad to be German, it's bad to be Italian, it's bad to be Spanish or Portuguese or any other European nation. What happened to these groups in America is that they came over here and they were amalgamated into the oppressor caste. They came over here and they ceased being Italian, they ceased being Greek, they ceased thinking as oppressed workers from oppressed groups in Europe. They started seeing themselves as white. And when you are white in a settler colonial country founded by white people for the benefit of white people, when you think like that, you start seeing other people as enemy, competition. See, these capitalists, they're slick. They know that there's a material basis of unity among workers of all classes. I mean, workers of all races, workers of the same class. Anyways, they know that there's a basis for unity. And they know that they are few. We are many. So they conjure up these various diversions, these various treats for workers that look like them, workers that came from the same place as they did, Europe. And these white workers were opportunistic. They took them. They're like, oh yeah, you know what? Fuck it. We don't want to link up with slaves and indigenous people, anyways. So we're gonna take your treats, and we don't view, like, Americans, especially white people. They see working class as being a bad thing, right? They see it as being meaning poor. They see it as slums. They see it as rats and roaches. They don't see working class as something that you should be proud of. They see the working class as something to escape from. And that's what many white ethnic workers did. They saw themselves as being successful. They were able to buy 2 cars. They bought a ranch house with a garage in the suburbs. And they left their black coworkers in the hoods. So, again, these capitalists are very slick. They know what they're doing. Oh, this is dumb. I remember last summer around the 4th of July, I had a member of the local SWP try to tell me that the American War of Independence was progressive. CPUSA had this line all throughout the 40s. Their position was that communism is the new Americanism. Progressive for whom? Tell us the truth. Who were the primary beneficiaries of the American Revolution? You know the answer. We all do. Only a total unrepentant reactionary would lie to the people, especially on this point. He talks about Howard Zinn and his People's History of the United States. Very good introductory book. In The Sopranos, I believe it was actually assigned to AJ by one of his teachers. That wouldn't fly today. Like if these reactionary parents, especially in the district that The Sopranos lived in, found out that somebody had gave their kids a book written by a progressive historian, they'd be hell to pay. They're already taking out books on the civil rights movement and taking out so-called gender ideology books out of libraries. But in 1999, it was acceptable and to portray in a major TV series a kid in a rich school district receiving a copy of A People's History of the United States. Yeah, what's happening in Florida is wild. It's crazy. Well, it's not crazy because these reactionaries that are doing all these horrible things, they have a method to their madness. What is their goal? What is their desire? Their desire is to remove trans people from public life and, if possible, destroy all of them. Again, that's why sectarianism has to be defeated. Oh, Du Bois, I mentioned him earlier. Yes, the average citizen of England, France, Germany, the United States has a higher standard of living than before, but whence comes this new wealth? It comes primarily from the darker nations of the world: Africa and Asia, South and Central America, the West Indies, and the islands of the South Seas. It is no longer simply the merchant prince of the aristocratic monopoly over the employing class that is exploiting the world. It is the nation, a new democratic nation composed of united capital and labor. Yeah, think about it. Yet, the self titled anti racists of the left continue with their infantile fixation on the Klan, Nazis, and right wing militias, groups that they say they are against but in fact demonstrate a tolerance for in practice. Standing around chanting empty slogans in front of a line of police separating demonstrators from the Nazis in a peaceful demonstration is contradiction in its purest form. Both the police and the fascists must be mercilessly destroyed. As the Spanish anarchist Buenaventura Durruti proclaimed back in 1936, fascism is not to be debated, it is to be smashed. There is no room for compromise or dialogue except for asking them for a last meal request and choice of execution method before we pass sentence. And even that is arbitrary. I love this guy. True, tactical considerations must be examined, but if we can't get at them then and there is no rule that says we can't follow them and hit them where they least expect it, except for the rule of the wannabe rulers of the Marxist Leninist white left vanguards who only see the fascists as competition in their struggle to see which set of empire builders will lord over us: the good whites who regulate us to the American left plantation of the glorious worker state, or the bad whites who work us as slaves until half dead and then laugh as our worn out carcasses are thrown into ovens, cut up for scientific purposes, or hung from lampposts and trees. You people have yet to show me the qualitative differences between a Klan Nazi-style white supremacist dictatorship and your concept of a dictatorship of the proletariat in the context of his particular country and its notorious history. So far, all I have seen from you is arrogance in coalitions, petty games of political one-upmanship, and ideological/tactical rigidity. Let's pretend that one of your various wannabe vanguards actually seizes political power in every one of your platforms, your programs. From the program of the RCP USA to even smaller, lesser known groups, there is usually a line somewhere in there about your particular party holding the key levers of state power within a dictatorship of the proletariat. Have you have any of you actually considered what that sounds like to a community without real power? Does that mean that we as black people are going to have to fight and die a second time under your dictatorship in order to have equal access to employment, housing, schools, public office, party status, colleges, or our own personal lives generally? So, yeah, like, and I refer to people that think like this, that are obsessed with securing power and are white. I refer to them as red cops. Like, we're already fighting a struggle against the police. And it seems to me and a lot of other people that that a lot of white leftists, they just want to be the cops. And as a black person, that bodes kind of ill for me. And it bodes kind of ill for my people. Because we are black people. We are a rebellious people. We are a people who do not take bullshit. Like, you're not going to just come into our neighborhood and round up all the drug addicts, round up all the alcoholics, take away our uncles, our brothers, our cousins because of your stupid little power fetish and desire to lord it over other people. Hey, it's clear to me why you all ramble on and on about the revolutions of China, Russia, Vietnam, Cuba, etc. They provide convenient cover for you all to read escapism to avoid a serious examination of the faults in your current analysis as well as in the historical analysis of the last 30 years of struggle in the U.S. Snaps. Well, I hate snaps. It's kind of a liberal thing. The black question. I hate hearing like things referred to as the question. Like, I'm not a fucking question. I'm a person. Trans people are not a question. They are people. They are people whose rights are being fucked with. Like, you cannot just totalize everything into a question. The answer to the black question is simple. It's not a question. We are people. You will deal with us as such, or we will fight you and the rest of the white settler nation by and any all means necessary. We will not be cowed or dominated by anyone ever again. And he wraps up with a quote by Comrade Kwame Ture. It is a commentary on the fundamentally racist nature of the society that the concept of group strength for black people must be articulated, not to mention defended. No other group would submit to being led by others. Italians do not run the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith. Irish do not chair Christopher Columbus societies. Yet when black people call for black-run and all-black organizations, they are immediately classed in a category with the Ku Klux Klan. Very good. So I enjoyed this piece. It's dope. So, yeah, I've got a lot of time for black anarchists. They have experienced the same issues with settler leftists that I have as a black Maoist. Um, Many of them have suffered at their hands, not physically, but there's been a lot of manipulation and con artist bullshit that, frankly, um, inhibits and wrecks the hope for unity that is needed on a tactical basis. It harms our community. It harms the revolutionary movement, the revolutionary project, and it just marches us further and further towards the abyss. Like, we are facing an existential crisis in the form of climate change. Like, this is not something that we can just keep kicking down the road. Like, in another 100 years, there may not be any humans left because leftists are too busy jumping down a comrade's throat who just wants to feed homeless people, or because they don't have the right line on Stalin. Like, Stalin is dead, okay? He doesn't have to deal with this stuff. His bones are rotting in fucking Moscow. We are here. And if we want to ensure that a world is left for our descendants, for our kids, and for our grandkids, we have to actually get serious about this shit. We have to look at things politically. We have to move politically. We have to act politically. And we have to go among the masses with humility, with a desire to serve them, heart and soul. Otherwise, we're all gonna fucking die. Like, everybody in this chat, everybody in this chat knows, everybody that's a Twitch streamer, everybody that's arguing on Twitter, everybody that's doing all of these things, it's just gonna be memories. Maybe the Dolphins will take over and we'll be known as the dumb gods. Who knows? But I will be back tomorrow with the Progressive Plantation and explain even further why I quit worrying and learn to love the anarchists. Catch y'all then.